Hi there. Thank you for joining me for today's video. We're going to want to start. So you want to start in the body. Connects to our shoulder. Because this is that the person serious discomfort. So I'm going to start by, seems like my table got shifted a little, so I'm going to push it up. I'm going to start by just lifting up the feet to straighten out the hips. Do a little hip release. And then make sure that that pillow that's under the knees is in the right place. And then we've got a good base to start on, right? I want to check in with what is happening in the hips themselves, any tightness in there. And so right now I'm just gently palpating surface and using my hands to kind of see where the alignment is, where Eric's knees are in relation to his shoulders, in relation to where his shoulders are, how that all affects the neck. And during this time, you want to keep checking in with the person that you're working on to see where their discomfort is, to make sure that they're doing okay. Are you still doing okay?
I'm doing okay.
All right. So now I'm going to go in and lift up Eric's head. And then use this lift to get my one hand under his shoulders. So now I can lift his shoulders a little bit and slide the other hand under. And then slide this hand under. And you want to really, I trust Eric to communicate with me if something hurts. You really want to create that trust with the person that you're working on. Make sure that they feel comfortable in telling you if something feels like too much. Because especially when we're in a state of higher discomfort, we want to avoid jarring or, causing any additional pain. You want to also be cautious that your shoulders don't hunch up while you're doing this, because if you're uncomfortable, you're just not going to be able to be as gentle or as present with the person that you're working on. So now that I'm under his shoulder, I'm going to lift them and just reinforce it. You can do this with, probably not going to work with eye that I want to use it on his neck. So now I'm going to go in and gently to follow that alignment, okay? And I'm going to go in and start doing some of that just gentle friction along the base of his skull, his occipital area, to just kind of check in both through palpation and through his level of comfort with what's going on in there. Oh, this feels okay so far?
Feels lovely, thanks.
Yeah. So I'm just pulling toward me and gently releasing, pulling toward me and gently releasing. Now I'm going to do some gentle motion. Now, it can be really challenging. My hands are just gently supporting Eric's head and lifting it off the table slightly. It's a practice for the person that we're working on to let go of their body and allow us to move it for them. That's really what we want for this move. We want the person that we're working on to be as passive as possible. So if you feel them picking up their head or neck, just pause, ask them to release it, and then gently continue. So first we're going to just go, I'm turning his head to a side, very slowly, very gently. Just slowly going to a side. And when I meet any resistance, I'm just going to pause there. So I've moved his head so it's tilted toward the camera. And when I started to feel any resistance, I'm just pausing, allowing him to just feel it. And then I'm going to go back to center. So that his saying might not be able to get exactly straight, and that's okay. Just being gentle and not forcing. Then we're going to go to the other side, just slowly, slowly tilting. And as soon as I hit a barrier, I'm just going to pause there. Just allow the body to unwind itself, right? Because our bodies are amazing. And I'm going to repeat that 2 more times. So we're going to go back up into center and pause there. It's kind of allowing the body to take a break and get its bearings. And then I'm going to move back to the first side, nice and slow. And I can go a bit further. And I'm just going to pause when I hit that new boundary. And then slowly return to center. And Eric is swallowing, which is a good sign, right? Now I'm going to go back to the second side. Nice and slow, turning. And when I hit the boundary, I'm just going to pause. Swallowing or deep breaths or fluttering eyes, all that stuff shows us that the person that we're working on is going into somatic release, right? They're just going into that nice state where the body is able to rebalance on its own. And then slowly I'm going to return to center. Last time. And if you don't hit a boundary before it, you just want to pause when the chin, there's my boundary, but you just want to pause when the chin is kind of like over the shoulder in alignment. You don't want to twist too far. You don't want to twist in a way that would be uncomfortable. And then back to neutral. You want to encourage your person not to help. Eric started to help me a little there. So go ahead and just release your head. And then we're going to move back to that second side. Good. And then we're just going back up to center, to that neutral position. And I'm going to check in with that gentle friction around the occipital area, again, the base of the skull there. And just notice what has changed and where there might still be stiffness. And I'm just doing a gentle circular friction. So now I'm going to lift his head up, just straight up toward the ceiling. I'm putting my hands just behind his head at the base of the back of his head, just lightly cupping. And I'm going to lift up a couple inches. And now, Eric, I just want you to go ahead and drop your head. Now you want to do this really slowly. This is going to release those anterior neck muscles. And it If it releases too quickly, it could cause some dizziness. So we really want to be cautious and slow with this. And I'm just holding his head, and I'm going to just gently, slowly move back down toward the table. Really, the slower you go, the better, because it gives the body that opportunity to really be present with what's happening. And then I'm just going to release it. Now, since I'm gliding through his hair anyway, it's a great opportunity to just grab onto his hair and do some gentle hair pulls. So I'm creating a flat with my fingers to brace against, to do some pulling. And this releases the connective tissue, the fascia in his skull, covers his face, goes down behind his ears, and ultimately connects to his neck muscles, or affects them, even if it doesn't connect directly, because fascia is everywhere. So not all of it does. I'm just doing some gentle finger scrubbing because I noticed that there's some tension in his skull, especially above his ears. So I'm going to go in and do some circular friction with my fingertips. And then I'm going to go back in and do a hair pull again. Nice and gentle. Right, so we're really working around those muscles that are causing the stiffness to help release it before we even go in to bother them directly, because we want to make it as easy as possible for the body to simply release. When we're on this occipital area, we are kind of affecting them more directly, but so gently that it's still okay because we're not jostling. Now I'm going to pull on his ears to release the fascia that attaches in that area. So I'm putting my thumb and forefinger inside the bottom of his ear, and I'm pulling down toward his feet. We have a bunch of anterior neck muscles that attach right behind our ear on our mastoid process. So this is another great way to just release any fascial bindings that are happening. Now I'm going to do the same thing, pulling down toward the table. And just find a way to comfortably pull on the ears, a way that's comfortable for you, comfortable for them. I don't have any fingernails. If you have any, you want to be cautious. And then I'm going to do the same thing, but pulling toward me this time. So now I've loosened quite a bit above, and I'm going to go and loosen some of the fascia below by just pushing down toward his feet. Again, nice and slow to push, and when I release, equally as slowly, because we don't want to jar or create any additional tension. Now I'm going to do the same thing, pushing down and out on his shoulders, right below his collarbone. And you want to just keep asking your person if they're comfortable on that 0 to 10 scale of tension or discomfort. You want to be in that 3 to 4 range, maybe even a 2. Now I'm just gently pulling up on his collarbone and releasing, up and releasing, up and releasing. Now I'm actually going to go down to his hips, because like I said earlier, what happens in our shoulders is echoed in our hips and vice versa. And in interest of, again, being as gentle as possible, when I go into his neck in more detail, I want to release his hips. So our iliopsoas muscle is actually two muscles, our iliacus and our psoas, and they join together. And our iliacus fleshes against the inside of our hip. So you want to go ahead and find the hip bone on your person. And on the side that's closest to you, you want to find this line of the inner side of the hip bone. And then when you find it, you're going to kind of curve with it. And you're not putting pressure really down. You're just kind of finding the pressure that feels comfortable. Does that feel comfortable?
It does.
And then you're going to just allow your fingers to sink. So I'm just holding them against the bone, knowing that that hip bone flares out a little bit. So I've got like a pocket that I'm going into. I'm not going straight down, kind of pointing down toward the table and back toward myself. I'm just waiting for the hip to release and let me in. And I'm going through layers of that fascial connective tissue, going through some other musculature and soft tissue until I reach that iliacus, right? You kind of get it a little bit on the surface, but the deeper you go, the more access you have to it. And just like any other move where we're interacting with fascia, which can act like a rubber band, right? You don't want to spring it back. You want to just go as slow out as you go in. And again, I'm not causing strain on my fingers because I'm not really using pressure. I'm just inviting the body to open up to me. And just like any of these moves, the more you do it, the more comfortable you'll get, the more you'll understand what it is that you're interacting with. Just invite it to open up to you. And after feeling it release a little bit, you can slowly let go. Now, this hip could certainly use more work, but I'm going to see how the other hip is doing. And then you'll want to use that to judge whether to revisit it or not. Because what we're looking for is achieving balance, right? It's typically imbalance that causes discomfort rather than just tightness alone. I'm going to walk around and get the other hip. And again, I'm just finding that bone, putting my fingers against it so that against the ilium, against the hip bone, so that my fingers are going down toward the table and back toward me. And I'm just allowing my fingers to sink in. And this side opened up a lot more quickly. So when I get to that point that feels about like where I was on the other side, I'm just going to slowly back away. And if you want to work with the hips a bit more, if you feel like your person needs it or that they were really tight, you can do that and then just pause this and resume when you're ready. So I'm going back up to the hip now, and I'm keeping an eye on what's happening below. And I can see that this shoulder is higher, his left shoulder. So I'm just gonna go in and create a fascial hold. So I'm holding up on his shoulder and feeling where the fascia is tight to create a spreading motion and light tension to release it. So this feels like it's largely happening on the same side. So I'm gently spreading. I'm not pushing down. You don't want to push down on the ribs. But on the shoulder, I'm pushing down a little, and on his torso, I'm just pushing down. I'm pushing toward his feet. And then I'm going to go to his hip where I can take a firmer hold to create that spreading. And again, you want to be slow going into it and slow coming out of it. And then I can see that this hip is a little bit lower. So I'm going to push down on the hip toward me and pull up on the hip on the other side. Encouraging alignment, knowing that that is going to help his neck release and feel more better. feel more relaxed. And I'm going to follow that up because I noticed that his torso on this side is a little lower, right? Because this left shoulder closer to me was a little higher. And then I'm going to go back into where I started, where I'm pushing on his left shoulder toward the table and on his left hip toward his feet. Looks like this kind of action. You want to make sure that you're holding in a way that makes you comfortable, keeps you comfortable, right? Okay. Now we're going to go back into the neck and just check in with how it's feeling. You can ask their person if you're the person that you're working on, if they felt any unwinding. Have you felt any unwinding?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, and then you can just go back in, and right now I'm grabbing the SCM, the sternocleidomastoid, which attaches on our mastoid and then comes down to attach on our sternum and clavicle. And it's a big muscle, right? You see, it's this big muscle that lights up, relatively big in the neck. And I'm just kind of pulling on it on both sides and gently, right? I'm just pulling on it, doing a little bit of friction. I've got my fingers on his mastoid process, that bump behind the ear, to get that attachment point as well. And I'm just allowing it to release. And his actually released pretty quickly, but you can spend as much time there as you want, as long as you are staying gentle. And I check it just by doing some of that cross friction and just kind of feeling what's going on. That palpation feels good for the person that you're working on and can be really informative. So now I'm going back into his clavicle, and I'm going to put fingers below his clavicle and on top of his clavicle, my thumb. And I'm just creating this kind of the same motion that I used on the SCM. It's kind of like a dollar sign motion. It's a little bit of friction above and below, and I'm gently pulling the clavicle toward his head, which kind of gives those anterior neck muscles a chance to release and relax a little bit. And again, slowly toward me, and then when I release, that is slow and gentle as well. And I'm alternating between holding static or holding still, and doing some of that that cross fibering dollar sign motion. Now I feel closer to his sternum. There is some tightness. So I'm just going to tap on there to bring the body's attention to it. And then go back in. And I can feel that maybe because it got so congested and tight in here, there's some lymphatic backlog, which kind of feels like bubbling or water under the surface of the skin. So I'm just going to gently, like without any pressure, I'm just rolling my fingers so they make contact and roll to just encourage it to loosen up and to flow. And it really, this is a great example of how things can feel really good without you doing very much, exerting yourself very much. Okay, how does this feel?
Oh, good. It's
Yeah.
like a one.
Yeah, it's like a one, but it's very relaxing and it's moving the fluid. And I can feel the bubbling, like that lymphatic feeling of congestion under the surface dissipating. And so to encourage that, I'm going to just do some gentle brushing with the back of my hands. Again, it's like no pressure, just moving into toward his arms. And then I'm going to bring that up to behind his mastoid process, that brushing. And again, with no pressure, I'm just going to follow the SCM down to the sternum and then out to the shoulders. So it's just gentle brushing down and out. Down and out. Now I'm going to go in and just check on his traps, his trapezius muscles up here. They're large and they cover other muscles that are deeper. So just going in, and I have my hands flat against his traps, and then I'm going to pull my thumbs and push them against his trap, right? So our trapezius muscles come up, and they are kind of the higher muscle on our shoulders. And so I'm just pulling, I'm creating a vise and just gently pulling that toward me. And following it out to the shoulders. So just pulling like the posterior part of our shoulder toward me and releasing. Toward me and releasing. Good. Now I'm going to go back in with that brushing. And now I'm going to check on the SCM one more time. Check on the mastoid process. And if there's any tightness, you can go back in with that cross fibering, that friction. Go into the occipital area. Check that cross fibering. And then we're going to go back to that first move and see where the new boundaries are for passive movement. So I'm going to start by going to that same side that I started. If you remember, if not, that's okay too. I'm just checking to see where that boundary is. And really, I can go all the way so that he is lined up with his shoulder. I'm just going to let him breathe there for a minute. And then gently return to that neutral position. And then I'm going to go to the other side. Let him breathe there for a minute. And then move back up to that neutral position. Just do some gentle cross fibering to encourage the occipital area to release anything left that it's holding. Back into the mastoid process. And then move into the brushing. just to follow that through. And then you just want to check in with the person to see if there's any other area that they feel needs to be really addressed. Maybe they need just a little bit more on one thing or another. Thank you so much for joining us today. And you can catch another live video next Saturday at 12:30. All right. I love you. I love me. I love us. I'll see you soon.